Has it influenced an organization, business, or community? Rarely do we take the time to reflect on these questions to understand the tremendous reach character has. One of the best ways to drive positive change for our planet and communities is to understand the true power of character and how to cultivate it within ourselves. In this episode of Meet the Author Live, the impact of the character has on all of us. Welcome to Meet the Author Live. I'm your host, John Saunders, founder of Forward Advisory Solutions, a coaching and consultancy firm and author of The Optimizer, Building and Leading a Team of Serial Innovators. My firm was built on a foundation of over 20 years as an executive distribution leader on Wall Street and a relentless focus on problem solving. This show offers you thought leadership wisdom through live conversations with the ability to get your questions answered live in the chat. To start with, please drop in the chat where you're joining us from so we get a sense of our audience. And so you know how to use the chat function. We'll use that in just a little bit to answer your questions and comments after we speak with our two guests today. In today's episode, we'll meet authors Kimberley Young-Milani and Gerard Seijts, who published their new book, Character: What Contemporary Leaders Can Teach Us About Building a More Just, Prosperous, and Sustainable Future. Their book illustrates the 11 dimensions of character through frameworks, their years of research, and interviews with exceptional humans. They make these insights highly accessible and actionable by bringing them to life through stories. A little bit about Gerard. He's a professor of organizational behavior at the Ivey Business School. He received his Ph.D. from the University of Toronto. He lives in London, Ontario. He's originally from Holland, and he tells people he won the lottery by living and working in Canada and occasionally enjoys red wine from around the world. Kimberley Young-Milani is the director of the Ian O. Inatowicz Institute for Leadership at the Ivey Business School. Kimberley is a graduate of the University of Toronto and the University of Oxford. She lives in London, Ontario. Her background is Celtic and Lithuanian. She studied Celtic and Greek mythology and enjoys time with her daughter. Kimberley and Gerard, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us, John.
It's really a pleasure, and it's been such a delight to read your book and get to learn more deeply about character. As I read through the book, I so appreciate the perspective you share to help us understand and rethink character, because it's, as I said in the opening, it's not something we often think about. I found so many lessons you share that help us see the immense presence character has in our lives and the impact it can have. But it's one of those things we don't often notice until it's lacking, right? And a key theme I heard throughout the book was the willingness to listen to other points of view. And I so appreciate this thought from astrophysicist and science communicator Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the folks you interviewed, and that is this idea around curiosity. If you had a curious world, then you wouldn't have adults stuck in their ways. We would more often say, I wonder if there's another way to think about this. I love this thought. It makes me curious, right? What drove you all to write this book? Where did the passion for this come from?
Well, first of all, John, thanks again for having us, and thank you to all the viewers that are joining us this afternoon. It is really much appreciated. And so, let me try to answer that question, John. At least give you my perspective, and where did my curiosity come from? What got me interested in this topic? That was really what happened in 2008, or the onset of the global financial crisis in 2008. We don't have to go very far and to remind ourselves that many people were wondering as to what was happening at the time, and more specifically, what was the role of leadership in the lead-up, right, to this particular crisis, because so many smart people seem to be at the epicenter of it. And so that question seemed to be particularly relevant to a business school that cares deeply about building the next generation of leaders for the public, the private, and the not-for-profit sector. So we did what academics oftentimes do, which is to start thinking, reflecting, and talking and writing, right? This deep sense of curiosity and bringing a learning orientation. So myself and a number of other of my colleagues put pen to paper. But you know what they say about academics, right? It's just their points of view, and they're not always connected to reality. I disagree with that, but it is what it is. And so we're wondering, what would the real leaders, those in the C-suite, actually believe? What are their perspective? What have they seen, heard, observed? And to make a long story short, John, we shared our piece, kind of a position paper, and it really resonated with those leaders that we invited. We actually organized a series of roundtable conversations across Canada. We went to London, UK, New York, Asia, and had all kinds of conversations. And at all of those conversations, it started with this particular book, Leadership on Trial, a manifesto for leadership development. And there's two really interesting things in this book. First of all, we changed our belief as to what good leadership looks like. It's not just competencies, but it is also the commitment to the role of leadership and kind of the character piece. And the character piece was wildly intriguing because almost every conversation, every roundtable, people spoke about the relevance, the importance of character. But John, here was the really interesting thing. If you have 25 people, 50 people, they all thought it was relevant, give or take, but nobody really understood what it was. What exactly is character? And here it gets really interesting because one of our alumni, Ian Inatowicz, found this question fascinating. And he really understood the relevance of character to leadership and leadership development. That then led to the foundation of the E&O Inatowicz Institute for Leadership, where we, not just myself, but quite a few colleagues, actually focus on the particular question: what is leader character? What does it look like? How does it affect leadership in organizations? Again, public, private, not-for-profit sector. And so after 15 years, I think we have results that we can take pride in. We're still an academic institution, academic unit, so it is about research, student programming, and outreach. And so, John, whatever we do, it has always have to be based on good scholarship, good research. And so I think we're very active in this particular area. Whatever we do in the classroom, degree and non-degree granting programs, has to be based on that scholarship, on that research, but we bring it into the curriculum. And, core courses, also a set of electives. And people get exposure to this. They see the relevance, the importance. And we try to build character in people. And finally, it is the outreach or the thought leadership. And that leads to kind of writing for practitioners. It led to this particular book, etc. The final thing I will say is that we're not the only one. And this gives me hope, John, for the future, because obviously we care deeply. I changed my entire academic career. I used to be motivation, goal-setting teams and the like. It is now about leadership, character, and the development of leader character. But we're not the only institute here in academics, right? There is fascinating research happening at Oxford, other schools in the United States. There seems to be a real momentum, and that gives me hope, it gives me enthusiasm, and it only deepens my curiosity and this love for learning as to what character is and the relevance. Though that, in a nutshell, is my passion for the topic.
It's fascinating to me that it started in 2008, right? Or it didn't really start there, but kind of solidified for you in 2008. You went off on this journey to do all this research and learned so much. And, it's just incredible what I found in the book and reading it, and there's so many lessons. I can't wait to dig into them. Kim, anything you would add to that, or you want to?
Yeah, actually, I'm approaching this from a sort of a completely different position. So while Gerard and his colleagues at the time were examining the financial crisis, I was working at a different part of the university, actually literally up a hill from where Ivey is geographically located, at a place called Brushy University College, which at the time was Canada's only women's university. And my roles there were as the director of the Institute for Women in Leadership and the director of the Circle Women's Center. And it was especially through my work at the Circle that I engaged in and facilitated and was really witness to the power and the impact of character development that is conscious and intentional. So even though actually I wouldn't have called it character development at the time. And what I also realized was I was exceptionally privileged, or I don't know, maybe just plain lucky, to work within an environment, and particularly in communities within that environment, that deliberately embraced and emphasized the cultivation of who I was as a whole person, not just who I was as a worker or an employee. And unfortunately, when I would talk to friends and acquaintances or others within my networks, I found out that this was not the experience that most of them were having within their workplaces. And I actually really thought that was an incredible shame. And I wanted to try and help change that. And I did know that there was a sort of universality or broader applicability to what I was experiencing and facilitating at Brusha. But because the environment was so unique, meaning it was women's only, it was feminist, it was more socially focused, I kind of lacked the language or the framing to translate that understanding into a more typical organizational setting or into the wider leadership discourse. And so when I joined the Inatowicz Institute at Ivey 7 years ago, all of that really changed. It provided me with the ability to capture and convey what I had learned and experienced in an accessible way to a wider range of people, and, to hopefully try and create, in my own small way, some impact. So for me, that's where my passion for character came from. And also for writing this book, I really sought to bridge those two experiences.
That is so interesting to me that you had this, one experience with character early on. It's sort of the all-female school. And then again, your curiosity drove you to continue to push on this. And when you joined Ivey, you expanded your thinking even further. Mm-hmm. So given all this work and research that you've done, and Kim, maybe we'll come back to you here, how would you define character? Because I don't know that all of us really have put a lot of thought to that. Certainly not as much as you.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because as Gerard kind of alluded to there when he was talking, it really isn't, a common understanding or definition of what character is. And oftentimes in workshops I deliver, or even if we did it right now into the chat, if you ask people to sit and define character, you'll get as many different definitions as there are people in the room. It really is sort of that amorphous, even though they all sort of dance around or hearken towards the similar things. So what we want to really look at is that character ultimately is a part of the fabric of our being, right? It's really a part of who we are. But ultimately, character, or when we talk about strong or well-developed character, we're talking about an interconnected set of virtuous behaviors. And so what I mean by that, and by virtuous, it means that these are behaviors that are beneficial to yourself, to others, and to society. And really, to be more specific about it, the way we frame it at the Institute and how we constitute our framework is that character is made up of 11 different dimensions that interact and influence each other. So get ready for the list, but the dimensions are accountability, collaboration, courage, your drive, your humanity and humility, your integrity, your sense of justice, your temperance, and your transcendence, which is your ability to be sort of visionary and future oriented. And all of those dimensions kind of constellate around a central dimension of judgment. So this really means that our character is revealed through our decisions and our subsequent actions. And I'm not just talking about sort of big existential decisions, but more so the mundane or the little and everyday decisions that add up to become a part of our habitual behavior. One of our colleagues likes to talk about how it's our decisions in the micro moments. And the other thing I think that's really critically important to understand when we're talking about character is its capacity to be developed. So character is not something that you're born with, which is often a myth that people believe, but something that is built. Character is really like a muscle. And the more you exercise those dimensions of yourself, the stronger they become. And if we do not, then that dimension of self atrophies, and it impacts actually the strength and the efficacy of our judgment.
It's so fascinating to think about that. I don't think we often think about character as a muscle. And as I said in the opening remarks, if we exercise it and practice it, right, it gets better and stronger. And if we don't, it can certainly go in the wrong direction and create a lot of problems for organizations and certainly the culture. As you shared in your comments earlier about the folks that weren't really feeling sort of seen at work. So I really appreciate that. Gerard, anything you'd add to the thoughts on what character is?
No. I think Kim did an outstanding job. The only thing I would add, John, is that what Kim talked about, this particular framework, the leader character framework, we didn't arrive with this overnight. This was years and years of study. And when I said earlier that whatever we do coming out of an educational institution, academic institution, has to be based on good research, this took years for us to develop. And obviously, there was a bit of history of research around virtues and virtues-based leadership, but I think we expanded on that quite significantly and really got the language right, so to speak. But no, I think Kim articulated that very well.
A plus, Kim, A plus. And by the way, I would like to share that a number of people put in the comments where they're joining us from, and we have folks from all over, many in Canada, but certainly we've got a friend in Holland, it looks like here, Gerard, maybe one of your friends in the Netherlands, several folks across Canada and in London and North Carolina. Thank you for joining us. And saw someone on here from India. Welcome. It's always amazing the global audience we get in the show here. So not only did you do this incredible research on character and develop these 11 dimensions inside your new book, which is available now on Amazon. This is the title of the book for anyone who might be looking for it, Amazon or wherever you buy books online. You really take these lessons and turn them, make them come to life through stories. So why is that important? And where did that sort of thinking come from?
So actually, it's so wonderful to hear of all the different places people are joining us from today, because that speaks to why we wanted to actually use storytelling as our format. Really from across time, across cultures, across geography, wisdom, which, practical wisdom is also what Aristotle referred to as our judgment. Wisdom's really been translated through stories. This has been our knowledge mobilizer as a species, essentially. And whether those are through myths or parables or spiritual tales, indigenous teachings, or even actually just fiction, stories allow wisdom to be shared and to really actually resonate within us. And so stories actually are not necessarily about the authority of the teller. It's about actually what's happening within the unfolding narrative that connects with us and takes us on a journey and doesn't sort of just drop us in a destination, like here's the facts and memorize the end piece, but it takes us on a journey so we understand how we got there. And, it was really actually interesting in the book that we had the great privilege of interviewing the Honorable Murray Sinclair, who is an exceptional Indigenous leader here in Canada. He was a Canadian senator, and he was also the chief commissioner of our Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And when he talked to us about what they call the 7 grandfather teachings, or the 7 sacred teachings, he said to us, this is to quote him, he said, "The elders never actually said the 7 grandfather teachings are wisdom, love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, and truth," which is their set of wisdom teachings. He said, instead, what they would do is tell us a story. And then at the end of it, they would say, and that's why what have you is important. That's why humility is important. That's why bravery is important. So he really he echoed that sort of thought that we were having, that stories are a really great vehicle to transmit and transfer for knowledge. And then the other leader we actually learned a great deal from and kind of came to a realization through our conversation with it was Cameron Bailey, who's the CEO of the Toronto International Film Festival. And through that conversation, we really came to realize and capture it that stories can act as both a doorway and a mirror. So stories can show us experiences that are, as a doorway, that are vastly different from our own, take us to places we'll never visit. We meet or encounter people who are completely unlike ourselves. So they can open us up to new ways of thinking, to empathy, to understanding, to compassion. They might also invoke your sense of justice. If you're hearing a story of an injustice or courage, what have you. But then at the same time, stories can also be a mirror. We can see ourselves within them or within the experiences that are being shared, see beliefs or thoughts that are also similar to our own, and make us feel actually really interconnected to other human beings, maybe grateful. It shores up our resilience, gives us confidence. So that's why stories, to us, were really important, that they're just really built into our DNA as a way to learn and to learn about ourselves and about others and the world around us.
And I love that you share this, it's been the way we've passed on wisdom as long as there's been humans alive, right? How long have we been telling stories around fires, right? In fire pits and this kind of thing forever. Mm-hmm. And it looks like at least a few folks out there agree with you. James Richard shared, better judgment makes for better decisions, making our personal and professional words the best they can be. Brilliant concept. Thank you for jumping in there, James. Oh, we've got a few folks from my neck of the woods around here. Hello, Sandra. Thank you for joining us. A lot of folks jumping in here, and thanks for jumping on here today. Another local friend here from Maryland, where I'm sitting. So many folks continue to join us here. Thanks for doing that. And I would encourage all of you to start thinking about questions you want to ask, because we'll jump to audience questions here in just a little bit. Gerard, I want to turn to you for a second here. And, when I think about my own career on Wall Street, and as I read your book, the discussion of character and leadership it's just often not even a part of the discussion. And I certainly, as I reflected on my own career, I sort of thought about that a few times as it felt like it was lacking. Why is that? And, is there more demand for it? Are people starting to recognize the power of character more now?
Sure. Before you're calling out people, let me call one out myself.
Yeah, do it.
Astounded to see a very old friend of mine from Holland, Roland Bezemer. I served with him on a board many, many, many years ago in that beautiful town of Maastricht. And so, Roland, I hope you're doing really well. So, John, to answer your question, you asked me two questions. First of all, why is there a greater demand for character right now? It's really interesting, John, because I think the 2008 crisis actually reinforced the importance of character. And maybe we knew that deep down in our souls, but somehow we seem to forget about it. That was business. While we were on this journey of thinking and reflecting on character, what it is, of course, you had the Penn State sexual abuse scandal. That was a big story in sports. And then, of course, politics is changing and continues to change. And, people these days frame it as a contest of character. So, John, it seems to be becoming increasingly relevant. We seem to be using that word a lot. And maybe, as I said earlier, we forgot about this a little bit. So why hasn't this been more fully integrated in organizations? Again, John, much of what we write in the book and our research has actually very little to do with the brilliance of Ivey professors. It has really been a gift given to us by people in the field. If Ivey is doing one thing really well, has always been this notion around real world leadership. So here's what people told us. 3 reasons as to why it's not more fully integrated. First of all, character. That seems such a subjective word. It's also an emotionally charged word. John, if I'd like to have a conversation with you about your character is something deeply personal. Like, how dare you asking or talking about my character? And so, when we would like to engage in a conversation around that, at a minimum, John, I would say we need to have the right language, the right vocabulary. A language that actually resonates with people, that's helpful, right, to address challenges in the workplace. And for a long time, that language wasn't really there. I still recall an event or some teaching I did with an organization out east. We were early in our journey around leader character and the development of leader character. And I used a particular tool. I won't mention which one. It's not really relevant here. But it was a well-established tool. People would know that. And I thought, let me distribute that. And it's a self-assessment. And 10 minutes into the conversation, John, people were rolling their eyes because the language didn't really resonate with people, right? It had words like zest and love, and very few senior peoples, use those words in their daily language in business organizations. Whether that's right or wrong, but I felt I had lost the audience. And so here was the key. If we want to go from thinking and talking about leader character to do something about it, then we need that language. We need that vocabulary, not what academics think. They come up with fancy words, but what is seen as relevant and helpful, right, to leaders in the public, the private, and the not-for-profit sector. So one of the very big wins I would submit to you is that one of the things we did well is actually have that framework that actually gave us the language, the wording, and the associated behaviors. We captured that in the tool, and that to a great extent actually facilitates the conversations we now have with leaders and what character is, what it isn't, and how to implement this in organizations.
Fascinating the way you frame this, because, right, you talk about someone's character, maybe they feel attacked. Why are you attacking me, right? And then the conversation goes nowhere fast. So there was that element, and then this element of how do we talk about this? The words are sort of big and fluffy, or maybe not, or too fluffy, and so we can't get anywhere with it. And like anything else in business, we always want to sort of measure things, and it's been very difficult to do that. How would you address that question, and to what degree does the tool do that?
Yeah. And so that's incredibly important, right? Because as Kim said earlier, character, it's like a habit of being. Being is behaving, it's doing things. And so for us, it was critically important to talk about what are the observable behaviors, right, that actually reflect good character, or that map on those dimensions that Kim talked about earlier. So in coming up with this instrument, the Leader Character Insight Assessment, we got tremendous help from an assessment firm here in London, Ontario, Sigma Assessment Systems here in London, Ontario. Tremendously helpful. And so here's how it worked. Of course, we had at that time this particular framework, those 11 dimensions, but we needed to have behavioral items if we would like to assess or measure leader character. So one of the very first things we had to do is, okay, so what are those behaviors, the behavioral items? How would I phrase them in a particular statement? So we had to generate a very large pool of those behavioral items. but we had to check those items for clarity. There could be no ambiguity as to what the behavior implied, what it meant, etc. There can be no ambiguity or kind of disagreement as to the relevance or the irrelevance of these items. Because if it's not seen as relevant, John, then people roll their eyes and just skip over that particular tool, etc. And the third piece was that those items actually needed to load on the dimension that Kim talked about. So for example, I'll give you here 2 examples. Courage. So how would we measure that? What is a behavioral item associated with that? Many items, one of the items we use is displays resolve and stays committed to seeing things through. Or humanity, demonstrates care for others and actively promotes their well-being. Those are behavioral items. I can observe that particular behavior. Then importantly, right, is actually those items actually, are they related to particular outcomes that organizations or individuals care about? Is it related to turnover? Is it related to discretionary behaviors? Is it related to actual performance? Is it related to engagement in an organization? Because, John, if it doesn't predict anything, why bother? It also had to be different from established constructs. You think about it, character is truly different from personality, because if it's not, keep using the personality tools. If it's not different from values, why bother? So it had to be different. So when I said earlier, this took time actually for us to do research, that was the research supported by Sigma assessment system. So we use this tool now globally in degree and non-degree programs. Leaders at the highest levels, public, private, not-for-profit sector organizations, thousands of these assessments. And what's interesting, both self-assessment and 360s. I know I have limited time here, but here's the pitch I want to make. 2 things. First of all, I think she's on the call here, but the person that has been really instrumental, very helpful, right, is Julie Carswell. Julie Carswell from Sigma Assessment. So reach out.
Yeah, there she is.
There she is. Julie, thank you for all the incredible work that you've done. It gets even better. If people are intrigued, they only have to do one thing. I think John or Kim, you'll send out a link. If people subscribe to the mailing list of the Inutovich Institute, we send you a free LCA, right? And that is almost like your self-assessment of leader character. And see if it resonates with you, right? And what it might tell you about your leader character. It's a comprehensive assessment, comes with resources, but subscribe to the mailing list. I promise you, I guarantee you, we won't flood your box with emails. It's a kind of a quarterly newsletter with some updates of the Institute. So that, John, I know I'm rambling here, but that's the tool that I think was very foundational, to go from thinking and talking about character to actually do something about it in organizations.
Right, because at the end of the day, if you can't do something with it and show that it's actually having an impact on your business, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of interest in it. And clearly you've done that. And by the way, I did just drop the link in the chat, ladies and gentlemen. So if you want to sign up for the leadership newsletter from Ivey Business School, Gerard and Kim will be happy to send you a free copy of that LCIA Institute assessment. So thank you for that. Let's keep going here. Leadership character, and Kim, I want to come over to you and get a thought on this. It's important in any concept, any construct, but particularly in today's sort of societal climate that's gotten a bit more volatile. I know it's certainly feeling a little heavy in this country, in the U.S. this year with an election coming around. Why is it? How is it especially crucial in our current circumstance we live in today? Character.
Yeah, actually, thanks for that question, John, because a lot of times, especially in the early research and what we're talking about, we really focused on how this can help organizations. But, what we really hope to do with this book and, sort of where my passion comes from is, how can we impact the world and society? And, it's really clear that we are in a world of converging global crises. Some people call it the polycrisis, some perma-crisis. Because it just seems to be the way of things. And, what I mean by that is, obviously we all just sort of came out of this global pandemic, but we have remaining health challenges facing society. Climate change is a huge, huge challenge that's going to be faced by this generation and the one to come. We have social and economic injustice. Sadly, we're seeing a rise in armed conflict in different regions of the world. The political polarization that you mentioned, that's not only happening in the United States, but certainly you guys tend to dominate the airwaves on that discourse for right now. And then we certainly have, even fears rising about cybersecurity and AI. So all of these problems are converging, and they're really having like a significant and compounding effect on citizens and our communities. And from our perspective, though, no matter how broad and diverse these crises seem to be, there's one common crisis for us, and that is leadership, and in particular, leadership that is character deficient. And from our point of view, we really need leaders and citizens who would be willing to step up to the plate and tackle today's challenges if we're ever going to hope for tomorrow's flourishing. And, so what I mean by that is, like, we need to engage in our transcendence, being visionary and solution seeking, our collaboration, and our accountability, especially for a wide range of stakeholders. The days seem to be numbered that shareholder primacy is going to be the only thing that organizations have to tend to. And those stakeholders include not only employees and customers, but the communities within organizations, within what they operate, and of course the planet. And so ultimately, if we really want to create a sustainable and thriving world, it comes down to us really needing leaders with the judgment that is necessary to balance complex and really competing interests, and who, in our view, have the strength of character to really wisely navigate an uncertain and volatile world. And this is why we think character sits at the heart of solving today's grand challenges, because it's going to take character-infused judgment to do so, because it was character-deprived judgment that got us into this mess in the first place.
Character-deprived judgment. No, this is certainly reflecting on Gerard's story makes that come to light for me. And, thinking about character and the challenges that it can create in society when it's lacking, are there particular areas you found that leaders struggle with in character? Maybe we'll jump over to you, Gerard, for this one.
Yeah, before I answer that question, I mean, I hope that the opening of the book is really captivating, because the person we feature in the opening page of the book is actually the Prime Minister, right, of Barbados, Mia Mottley. And in 2021 in Glasgow, she gave this speech that was labeled as her breakout moment. And she didn't say the word character, but if you go back and read that speech where she's challenging the world that we're not asking fast enough and that the poorer countries pay a price for lack of action, you read that speech carefully, John, you see that in so many words or so few words, she actually talks about these dimensions of leader character: accountability, humanity, justice, drive, courage. And so, Kim talking about kind of the environment, that was just a perfect opening, so to speak. Now, you asked about those dimensions that, people might struggle with. For me, that's an easy one. I know that Kim has a different opinion or different perspective, but it's funny, right? Because in many ways, it's temperance or the lack of temperance, right? The sense of restraint, patience, self-control, this calmness, which is especially relevant in the most dire situations. And I would say, John, more often than not, when we get the results, the aggregated results, when a company actually say, listen, part of your training program is the LCI, and say, okay, fair enough, give us the aggregated results, the overall picture. Temperance tends to be always the lowest scoring. Now, and Kim was alluding to that earlier. We might say, well, 11 dimensions are crazy, because who can remember those 11 dimensions? But as Kim explained, they're interrelated. Think about this. When you have high drive and high courage, in the absence of restraint or temperance, you might actually see some reckless behavior that compromises our judgment. So it is easy to see, right, how a dimension like temperance might get in the way of judgment and effective leader behavior. So that's always, and time again, right, that's the one that people often struggle with.
To take that pause, to have that moment to kind of reflect before we dive into something. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying there?
And I had to learn this the hard way, John, because I used to be, as people sometimes describe, this vicious dictator. Everything was a priority. I had to learn that every decision has a clock. Why does everything have to be a priority? I needed to stop, slow down, show some temperance, and move on. Listen, if the clock is 15 seconds, of course I'm going to make the decision. But if I have a week, 3 weeks, 6 months, temperance. Not everything is a priority. Every clock has a decision. Every decision has a clock. Temperance.
When everything becomes a priority, we tend to get very little done, right? Or we tend to upset people all around us because we're pushing them too hard and making them run the hamster wheel too hard. Kim, what dimension stands out for you that you see leaders struggle with?
Yeah, I will certainly, I agree with Gerard that temperance, and I don't want to say just leaders. I think it's all of us. So like he said, we get this aggregate data, the pictures of what like group character looks like. And in the 7 years that I've been at the Institute and doing the analysis for that data, there has been one small group ever where temperance was not the lowest. It was second lowest, but it was only one ever. So I think that's really remarkable. And when we talk about temperance and character as a muscle, you know, this is what bringing conscious intentionality to character development, why it's important, because in our push button world where we can literally talk into our phone and say, Siri, Alexa, tell me XYZ, and it's right there at our fingertips. We don't have to exercise those muscles of patience and calm. And so, temperance, I would definitely agree with Gerard that it's certainly one that I think leaders struggle with. And, you know, to be quite frankly, I struggle with it myself. But another two dimensions that are often actually low in those data sets is justice and humanity. I think we haven't, especially in organizational settings, we haven't cultivated those aspects of self as much. And, you know, there's been studies showing that there's been a decline in empathy. Certainly, if anybody goes onto the comments sections on social media, you can see a huge lack of empathy. You know, we even have the word trolling because it's such a thing anymore in our world. But a part of what sits under humanity, a part of one of those behaviors that I wanted to highlight is the behavior of forgiveness. I think this is something that we need to re-elevate in our world. And for a few things, I think externally, the way we judge others, you know, we often talk about how we judge ourselves on our intentions, but we judge others on their behaviors. And when we see somebody engaging in a behavior that, you know, perhaps we don't agree with, there's no room for forgiveness or for second chances or for change or for evolution. It's sort of, we've entered this cancel culture, or that's just it. You know, it just ends there, as opposed to understanding that we all will need to forgive and ask for forgiveness within our life. And so I think that that's something that we need to embrace more as a culture is forgiving others. You know, of course, the brilliant Nelson Mandela talked about that, you know, forgiveness liberates the soul. And so I think that's important. But I think the other part that's important that we see a lot with our students, and certainly I saw it a lot within a world of sort of a women's world, is forgiveness of self. We are so hard on ourselves that if we don't, you know, sort of manifest things perfectly, engage in things perfectly, then the self-criticism can be really harmful and really detrimental. And, you know, while we're curating the facade on social media, especially with our younger generations, it doesn't leave any room for the forgiveness of self, for failure, for room for growth. It's so it's something that I think becomes toxic inside us when we don't engage in the act of self-forgiveness. So that's something that I think is really important, especially as we journey in the development of character, that when we're going to start taking hard looks at ourselves, forgiveness needs to be something that we're able to start with, because otherwise, you know, we'll shy away from that development instead of just dive deeply into it.
I love this idea of forgiveness, not only for others, but for ourselves. And I think it was also Nelson Mandela that said, if we don't forgive people, right, it's like taking say angry at them, it's like taking a poison pill and waiting for them to die, I think is something I heard him say one time, which is, I think, pretty point on, because we carry around that anger, that poison, if you will. And so you talked a little bit about forgiveness. Do you feel like, Kim, is that the starting point? If people are sitting here listening to you talk and say, you know, boy, this book sounds amazing, I love these concepts on character, I've never really thought about it. Where do I start to think about bringing character more into my life intentionally?
Yeah, I would definitely, you know, I used to start, I'll get into a different one. I used to start with self-awareness, but over the years, now my advice would be to start with forgiveness. Absolutely. Because I think if we're going to engage in developing character, we're going to need to engage in some really honest reflection, and reflection for the point of introspection, which is reflection for the purpose of improvement. And if we don't engage in reflection in that manner, it can turn into rumination, which just essentially means, we dwell and fester those parts of ourselves that perhaps didn't show up at our best in the moments that we wish they did. So forgiveness for me is key to being able to engage in honest reflection about who we are and how we can strengthen aspects of ourselves. The other part is, I think, that reflection piece, which really cultivates self-awareness. So, because we need to know where we're starting from. So that reflection piece is important, not only to take a good look at ourselves when perhaps we didn't show up at our best in moments, when maybe our temperance got the better of us and we reacted or responded in a way, whether that's as a boss or as a parent or what have you. We responded when we maybe should have taken a breath or a few seconds to think of a better way. But we also need to be generous towards ourselves and reflect on those moments where we did show up and thought, like, I nailed that. Like, that was good. And so we can harness the learnings both from, but from both sides of that spectrum, so we can carry them forward in strengthening our behavior and strengthening that element, that aspect of ourselves. So certainly reflection, introspection, cultivating self-awareness, forgiveness, and then ultimately, like we've talked about, character development is muscular in a way, metaphorically. So you will only cultivate and develop those dimensions of yourself by doing them. So we can think for a while, we can harness the lessons, but if we don't implement the lessons, then they're not going to, come to fruition. So, you become courageous by doing courageous things. Now, I can't prescribe to you what that courage action would be, because courage looks differently to different people. So for some people who, have fairly well-developed courage already, that might be something like, bungee jumping or jumping out of a plane. For other people, like for me, and, to also exercise humility and make myself vulnerable, this is an act of courage because, it's kind of intimidating to be on a live webinar and, and to present what you hope, a work that you hope people really love. For some people who are really struggling and perhaps, have mental health challenges, courage means they actually just get up and get out of bed in the morning and encounter their day. So, but it's in the doing. So I think that's really important, is taking those reflection pieces and trying to figure out actions that we can take to strengthen those muscles.
Just understand where we are, where the gap is between where we are and where we want to be, and taking the time to reflect on that. I really appreciate that thought, and so many great lessons in the book. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't ordered their book yet, I dropped both the links for Amazon Canada and Amazon US in the chat. So go out and get your copy today. And we have a couple questions left there. We're going to dive into the audience questions, which I see queuing up. So please continue to add those, and we'll jump over there. Gerard, I want to come back to you here and talk about this amazing book you've put together, which again, I've just so enjoyed reading and learning from all these amazing humans you were able to interview. What do you want people to take away from your book, your new creation?
Oh, John, that's such a loaded question. There's so many objectives and motivations why I wrote this book, but I'll give you three. Number one, I want people to really walk away, understand that good leadership, as I said earlier, is always a function of competencies, character, and commitment. But for the longest time, the focus has always typically been on kind of the competencies, right? And so the character piece, what is it? What does that look like? The model that we talked about, the behaviors associated with that. People need to understand, right? There's nothing theoretical about this, right? Number one, clarify character. Number two, sometimes people think, well, character is kind of a nice to have. No, wrong thinking. There is nothing soft or even subjective about character. Character is a very consequential component of leadership, of good leadership. And there's plenty empirical and anecdotal evidence that this stuff matters, right? As Kim said earlier, it is foundational for for people, teams, organizations, communities, and the flourishing of people in the world. This stuff matters. And then the third piece, maybe the most important piece, is to actually illustrate it. What does this mean? How have these 15, 17 people that we had the privilege of interviewing, how did they rely on their character or those dimensions of leader character? How has it helped them to face the most challenging situations? How did they go through that learning journey? And so hopefully at the end of the book, people are inspired, because as Kim articulated, this is something that can be developed. We develop competencies. We develop our communication and negotiation competencies, but we can develop those dimensions of leader character as well. So that's my hope, to inspire, to make people think and start that reflection process, so to speak, and all of us, right, to take those incremental small steps to make the world just a bit of a better place.
It's not going to happen overnight. It's not easy to do. It takes great intention, and when we get it wrong or don't focus on it, it has a big impact. And, there was a woman I was working with over the last year who actually left her company because of the extraordinary lack of character she found in the leadership, and a person they kept on the payroll who had a very senior role, and that got her to quit the company because she just could not imagine being associated with somebody like this extreme lack of character. Kim, I want to jump over to you for our last question, and then we'll open up to the audience ones. Right. Whenever we go through book writing, oftentimes we start with an initial thought. This is what my book's going to be about. And then we get into the research and talk to these people that you all did. Nobel Peace Prize winner, someone that sailed around, the first woman to sail around the sailing race around the world, and so many other amazing people. What did you learn along the way in writing the book? What new knowledge did you gain?
I learned so many things. It was kind of funny. Every time Gerard and I would get off the call with a different leader, we would just sort of have to take a moment to say, wow, we couldn't wait to get into the transcript and mine and harvest all the different wisdom that was shared in these gems. And, even once I finally got a printed copy, it's all marked up with highlighting those gems that we found. But one of the most interesting things that I thought that I learned is that almost every single leader we talked to referred to at some point during their interview, we actually edited some of this out so it wouldn't be repetitive, was the importance of hope. So while character was profoundly impacted their behaviors and their judgment, it was rooted in the soil of hope. And I thought that was an exceptionally inspiring and beautiful thing. And the interesting part about it was that it wasn't sort of a Pollyanna-ish hope, or like it's wishy-washy, So it was something that was really rooted in wisdom. So it wasn't wishful thinking; it was wisdom. And so, for instance, Sister Joan Chittister talked about how hopefulness isn't magic or naivety, which being accused of being naive often comes with people who don't have such a hopeful view. But she talked about it as being a product of experience and surviving your experiences. Maria Ressa, the Nobel Prize winner, talked about how life without hope makes us automatons. We interviewed Pastor Gennady in Ukraine weeks into the war, and he talked about hope being natural. Like, he pointed, literally a kilometer from where he was standing when he was talking to us, outside along a riverbank, was the slaughter and devastation going on in Mariupol. But he pointed above him to a bud coming out on the tree because it was early spring, and talking about how hope is natural, how it, darkness always follows, or dawn always follows the darkness, or spring follows the winter, which I thought was extraordinary for a man in essentially a situation we would consider so dark. And then lastly, I loved Mary Robinson. She actually shared a quote from Archbishop Tutu that several other leaders included within their interviews, but we gave it to her because she was actually on stage with Archbishop Tutu. When he was asked if he was an optimist, he said no. He said, "I am a prisoner of hope," that he makes hope something inescapable in his life. And so that, to me, is something that I learned is critical to keeping up the work and as the fuel for trying to create a better world.
Stay positive, have hope, know that it's always out there, even in the disaster that's right. You saw this gentleman in Ukraine. That's amazing to think about that. Let's jump over. Gerard, do you want to add anything to your thinking on that? I'd love to get to a couple audience questions before we go to rapid fire here.
Sure, let's take those. Let's take the audience questions.
We have one here. It's kind of related to, I think, what Kimberley was talking about a little while ago. Does temperance relate to the practice of mindfulness? Do you see mindfulness having a greater role at work in supporting slowing down, practicing self-compassion, and practicing empathy and forgiveness? From Ariana Thompson. Thank you for the question.
Do you want me to take this, Gerard?
Please.
I absolutely think so. Mindfulness is an excellent tool to cultivate both empathy and temperance. I think, just the act alone of breathing with intentionality, it lowers sort of the blood pressure, and it allows us to it creates a different mindset, and it's kind of interesting. What I hearken this to is when I start actually workshop presentations, I put up a slide first and share a quote by Simone Weil that says that intention is, or attention, your attention is the purest form of generosity. And I do that not to try and guilt the people in the room to pay attention to me. It's about having them pay attention to themselves. Because what Weil's talking about in terms of attention is not contracted focus. It's about having your attention come into a stillness where it creates an expansiveness, where new ideas can come in, where curiosity can be cultivated, where forgiveness can happen. And so I think mindfulness is an extraordinary tool to engage in character development, and it's certainly one that we recommend when we're doing our various activities at the Institute.
I think that's a strong yes. Strong yes there. Thank you for sharing that. Let's jump over to Anne's question here. Are you seeing organizations in the work you do reward or recognize things like temperance, justice, some of the keys, humanity in effective ways? Anything that's on par that's with how traits are celebrated in isolation that are perceived to be driving business results, even if only short term? So how are companies, if they are, how are they recognizing good character?
I need to think about this, Anne, because so here's the deal, right? I mean, I think we have tremendous traction with some of our work. We get invited in organizations, in the public, the private, and not-for-profit sector to talk about these things. They're really intrigued, interested. But then the key question is, how would you reinforce this, right? Through systems or structures in an organization. If we don't talk about these kinds of character-related behaviors, if we don't measure them, if we don't reward them, it just screams one message. It's simply not important. Now, I know Kim has some experience with this because one of our colleagues, Mary Crossan, actually offers an entire, I think it's like a 13-day workshop on this. But, and my experience has always been that, we promote people based on their performance, and performance is not always kind of character. It's an outcome. So I think we can do a much better job in embedding particular systems that not make character or character-related behaviors more important than competencies, but actually elevate the importance and put it at the same level as competencies. Kim, you have any thoughts? What have you seen?
So I think there's definitely organizations that are working towards that. For instance, some agencies within Canada's federal public service now are engaging in what they talk about as character interviews when they're looking to promote to their executive level. So they actually specifically design the interviews similar to how we designed the interviews for our leaders, but they design the interviews to try and draw out who this person is that they're going to promote into a certain consequential position. And so in that way, there's attention placed on that. And also the person who is given the role, I would consider that to be a reward, because they are given that role based on the strength of character that they saw during those interviews. Now, the other part that's interesting is for those who did not get the role, they are given feedback on how they can develop their character for the next time that they want to apply to a role. So I think that's a great way that organizations can actually start embedding character development within their practices and policies by making it important when they're recruiting, when they're selecting, when they're onboarding, when you're trying to communicate what kind of behaviors are important at your cult or in your company or your organization, and also, trying to infuse it within an organizational culture. So, but first and foremost, we don't act on what we don't talk about. So like for us, it's really about getting people to talk about this as a priority and important piece of the organization.
And the opposite of that can also have a terrible effect, right? When I've worked with companies that would have values and things they put forward like humanity, and they would give awards to people who didn't, who to Gerard's point, who delivered good performance but didn't necessarily live the values. And that I've seen that as a conflicting message I've had to work with some folks on. So thank you for pointing that out. Let's change gears here. And by the way, I dropped Gerard, Kimberley, and Gerard's LinkedIn profiles in the chat. I think I'll get Gerard's in there in a second. So if you want to connect with them and follow them, please do. And I'll drop shortly a way to connect with them if you'd like to have a discovery call with them to see what it's like having them possibly come in and work with your organizations and what that might look like. We can happily drop that link in there. And don't forget to sign up for the Ivey Leadership newsletter, and you can get a free copy or a free version of the LCIA assessment that they talked about. So with that, let's jump over to the rapid fire questions here. Thank you for all the questions we got put in the chat there, but are you guys ready to change gears here?
I'm a little scared, but let's go.
Let's do this. All right. I always like to start with an easy one. Favorite thing to cook?
All right. Well, that's real easy. No transcendence, no courage, and no drive. Egg whites and vegetables.
Strong.
I'm home all alone. Egg whites and vegetables.
Very nice. Kim, what's on your list?
I'm a soup maker. I love that slow process of, cooking your own broth and then making your own soup, and just the smells and the comfort that comes along with it.
Makes the house smell so good. First concert you went to?
So for me, it was Depeche Mode.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
I'm a little older than Kim, so my memory is abandoning me, but it must have been either the Simple Minds or U2. Last concert was U2 as well, and the next concert will be Bruce Springsteen, so lots to look forward to.
Very nice. And what about a walk-up song, Gerard? When you're coming out on stage, what do you like to hear there?
Zombie. The Cranberries.
Very nice.
I'm a little bit more optimistic. Mine would be a U2 song. I love Beautiful Day.
Oh, I love it. Last photo on your phone.
Oh, but that's an easy one. The book made it actually #1 bestseller here in Canada, Amazon. So I had to take a screenshot of that. So that's the one. Huh?
Very nice.
Yeah, I actually looked. I had the same one, so we would have the same answers. But if I went one before that, it was a picture of 4 of my dearest friends, and nice. I had on the beach actually.
Here's one that really gets us to understand people. Scariest animal?
Oh, not scary, but absolutely disgusting. I don't know why they're on planet Earth. Toads. They give me the shivers, literally. Ugh.
Yeah, I'm not fond of snakes, even though I really try to work on that. As there's such a, studying myth, snakes are a very primordial symbol. And but still, they just give me the shivers.
They get a really bad rap on this show here, no doubt about it. Have either of you asked anyone for an autograph now that you've been signing your books a lot, I'm sure, these days?
Yeah, I recently did, but I can caveat it that it was alongside and on behalf of my daughter. So I took her, we were in New York and we saw Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe, in a play called Merrily We Roll Along. So we stood at the stage door at the back and got his autograph.
Very nice.
Tessa Virtue, Scott Moyer, I met them in the train. They just got back from, let's not name that country. But they were Olympic medalists, gold, and they were just in the train. And for the non-Canadians, they're just 2-time Olympic gold medalists, Winter Games in ice dancing. They're legends.
Very nice. Most audacious goal for this coming year?
All right. So I already have the next book in mind. Won't volunteer what it's about, but that's always a lot of work. So I'd like to have the entire submission, the publisher, and the guests lined up. If I can do that, if we can do that before the end of the year, that's pretty BHAG, John.
Nice.
Yeah, I would agree. That's pretty big. Gerard and I often have different timelines, so hopefully I don't squash his goal on that one. I think just at the end of the year, seeing the numbers for the book and hopefully the impact that this book made and the feedback from readers. We love reading reviews on Amazon. It's really rewarding. So if anyone wants to drop us a review, that would be great. But we love, we try to inspire and empower people, and hopefully that's what happens.
Well, you've certainly done that for me. And made it a very memorable experience to read the book. But speaking of which, most memorable moment for you all writing the book?
That's an easy one for me. I'll take that first. There were many of these moments, and Kim already mentioned a few of those people. To have that conversation with Pastor Gennady Mognenko in Ukraine was unbelievable. The other one for me, the Canadian, was absolute showstopper, the Honorable Murray Sinclair. And when he talked about education and reconciliation, I think his line was, education got us into this mess. Education has to get us out of this mess. And I think Martin Luther King, many years, echoed something very similar. But I'm not always optimistic about education because, education, part of that is critical thinking. But that Murray Sinclair, the Honorable Murray Sinclair, that was an absolute honor to sit down with him. And I will never forget those two conversations, actually.
Amazing. Yeah. Let's keep running here. Maybe, Kim, you could start this one. Describe your writing journey in 5 words.
No, I think Gerard had a better one than that. I think it was writing makes me know what. Oh, I got 6 words. I think it's a great reflective process. Very nice.
Gerard, I think you had a bit more of a
yeah. Are you ready for this one? Yeah. I hate Kim's track changes.
That is exactly 5 words. Well done. Well done.
There's a lot of them.
Right. Character. What can contemporary leaders can teach us about building a more just, prosperous, and sustainable future? Such an unbelievable story. I've so enjoyed reading this book. Closing thoughts for our listeners here, Kim and Gerard.
Well, John, I articulated as to why I went on this journey and completely redirected, firmly committed to this. And so the one thing I would say, it might be a little harsh here, but I think we all have our why or our purpose. And for me, for whatever I do, fighting this battle to eradicate deficiencies in leader character, because we've seen what happens when leaders actually lack character. And as I think we have a sentence in the book that objective that I have, people might say that's completely unrealistic, unlikely to happen, etc. But I think it's an absolute necessity. So, John, that would be critically important, not just for me, but I think we have to ask the very best of the leaders that we elect, that we develop, that we vote for, and that we nurture. So that would be we cannot do this by ourselves. It's almost a community effort. So let me leave it with that.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. Kim, anything you'd add to the closing comments there?
Yeah, for me, I know we use a lot of the word leader, referring to a leader. But I hope that people understand that when we refer actually to leader character, it's about disposition and not position. So we're referring to each and every person on this call, not just those with rank or role. That gives them a title. So I hope that through this podcast and through the book that people understand how unique and special each one of them is and how they have a contribution to make to the world that is vitally important, that we all need to play our role in this. And that, the development and the cultivation of their character, that they are worth that journey. And so I hope they're inspired to engage in that, and I hope that they learn to see themselves in a light that is more empowered, more grand, more beautiful, and that helps to create the change we need.
Amazing message. Such a powerful story. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Gerard, for your extraordinary work. I certainly want to encourage everybody out there to schedule a discovery call with Kim and Gerard. I'll drop the link in the chat here in just a moment. But, your work on character is just amazing, and helping us understand its power and its impact, and how to bring it more deeply into our lives. It doesn't happen by chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate you sharing your story with me and with our Meet the Author Live audience. Thanks to our listeners and the many, many, many comments we've had in the chat here. Sorry I didn't get to all of them here, but thanks for listening in and joining the show. Definitely check out Character, What Contemporary Leaders Can Teach Us About Building a More Just, Prosperous, and Sustainable Future, wherever you buy books online, on Amazon, US, or Canada, wherever you go. And by all means, connect with Gerard and Kim on LinkedIn. I dropped their links in the chat, and certainly connect with me at JCS Optimizer on LinkedIn. Thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm your host, John Saunders. Keep moving forward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.